Well, hello, welcome everyone to this edition of the Alaska TTAP webinar series. Today we have Catherine Hensley, Division Administrator of the Alaska Division of the Federal Motor Carriers Safety Administration, and she's going to be discussing some unique Alaskan aspects to the commercial driver's license program and the drug enforcement on the Alaska and entry-level driver's training for Alaska residents. And this will be recorded and placed on YouTube after this. And the next webinar in the Alaska TTAP series will be focused on the Tribal Transportation Program Bridge Program at the end of May, currently tentatively scheduled for May 27th. And on that note, I will turn it over to Catherine, who is very excited to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to talk about all of this. So, if you do have questions, you can just drop them into the chat as we go. And if we come to a natural, there's natural breaks, and I will look at those questions after each natural break. So again, yes, I'm here in Alaska with you guys. I'm actually Alaskan born and raised. I grew up here, so this is all my backyard. And we're here in Anchorage in the division office. So if you do need anything ever, you can definitely reach out, and the team here will try to assist. So mostly I'm going to be talking about entry-level driver training, let's see, there we go. The Training Provider Registry and Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse to try to kind of just bring some information forward. A lot of what we'll be talking about today has to do with specific Alaska exceptions and exemptions, and kind of giving you the tools to determine if you are located in one of those areas and what that means for you. We are not the driver's licensing agency, so we're not DMV. We oversee that program, but we do not issue licenses. So I do want to make that very clear from the get-go. I know that last time I did this, I had a lot of questions about licensing and how to get licensing in certain communities. That's not us. We oversee entry-level driver training. We oversee CDL. So that's really the overview that FMCSA has. So we're going to go ahead and start with entry-level driver training. So this program started in February of 22. And the idea is that if you did not have your CLP or CDL at the time, then you would have to go through this entry-level driver training. And that also has to do with you're going from, if you have a Class B license to a Class A license, same thing for S endorsements, P endorsements, or trying to get hazardous materials. There's endorsements. There are certain steps that have to be taken to get those endorsements after that date if you did not hold them prior to that. So there are ELDT testing hubs around the state. They are on the road system, as you'll see, with the exception of Juneau, because these locations have the facility and the infrastructure to do entry-level driver training. So these are the main hubs that we hear most about for testing purposes. Obviously, that doesn't cover all of Alaska, which is where the first exception comes into play. So this exception has actually been around since even before FMCSA was an agency. And this basically allows for what is known locally as a bush license to be issued. These are those licenses that you're going to use them in certain communities, and all or most of the skills test is waived. The state of Alaska gets to determine what, if any, skills testing requirements are waived. The knowledge test is not waived. So you still have to take that written test. But the actual physical hands-on, that's the part that is basically doesn't have to happen unless the state requires it, which for those of you who deal with this regularly know that school bus is an example of you still have to have that skills test. But what this exception does, because it is an exception to the CDL, it means that entry-level driver training in these locations is not required. because it's a special license. It's a Restriction 7 license here in Alaska. And if you're wondering if your community is on that list, so DMV maintains that. It's their responsibility to identify which communities fall within that. And this is their website. This is not FMCSA's website. This is their website. But as you can see, you can go and you can look up Alaska DMV, type in exempt communities, and then they're broken down alphabetically. And this takes care of a lot of those communities around Alaska that have that threshold of 499 average daily traffic count volume. And it makes sense that they would use that because this was established by FHWA back in the day. But basically, it's your very small community. So if you live in one of those, please check that list because if you're only going to operate in that community, which is that Restriction 7 community, which is any of the communities that are listed on there, you can operate in any of those communities with that Restriction 7 license. It does not, it's considered an exempt license for ELDT testing. Again, you can go forth and do that. The skills testing, that is 100% on DMV. That doesn't have to do with this exception. They can, issue the license as is. That's DMV's decision, which we know that they still do skills testing for school bus, but ELDT is not required to request that skills test. So the next one is we have an exception. So the exception is in regulation. The exemption, it has a time limit. So we have actually extended already once for 5 years. The original issuance was in December of 22. It was for 2 years. And then in 24, we extended it out for another 5 years at the request of the state. And basically, this one also waives those ELDT requirements. But you do have to do the full skills test with a few exceptions, which is mostly has to do with those geographic limitations. So, it doesn't have, the on-ramp and off-ramp for the highway, things like that. It lists right here in the exception what those are. Most of it has to do with the ability to meet certain conditions and the ability to change lanes when and entering traffic. So a lot of those requirements, that's sort of waived for both the skills test, and then there's no requirement to do entry-level driver training in those communities. So you still have to do the knowledge test. There's still a skills test if you're operating in one of the 14 communities. And I'm sure your next question is, wait, what are the 14 communities? I'm glad you asked. So these are the 14 communities. They are spread all over the country, all over the state, I mean. And they are communities that are well above that 499 average daily traffic count. So they fell in between the gap of a standard license, but they're in an off-road system community where we wanted to make sure that you guys had an opportunity to get a licensure in the community that you're in and be able to use it. So this is that Restriction 8 license. And so this license would allow you to operate in all of Restriction 8 and all of Restriction 7 communities. And you do not have to do entry-level driver training in order to get the skills test and request it if you are going in that community and operating in that community. So if you are, in Sitka, but you want to operate in Sitka and in Juneau, then you do need a full license and you should go through the process in Juneau because you need to operate in both those communities. But if you're only going to operate in Sitka, then you can go and get your CLP. You can skip right over the entry-level driver training and go directly to the skills test. And it's a modified skills test for that community based on the infrastructure. Okay. Let me see. I don't see any questions or chats coming in. Okay, so that's entry-level driver training for Alaska. So these are unique licenses. If you have questions about how you would get that or how you would reach out to it, please do reach out to DMV. They are going to have the overarching responsibility for this and getting that license. But if you have a question about the regulations behind them, we are happy to answer that. So let's say that you are in a community, so you aren't off the road system, or you want to do that scenario that I said where you want to operate in like Sitka and in Juneau. So you need to get entry-level driver training. So then you would have to go to the Training Provider Registry. What you can do is you can search for training providers right on the Training Provider Registry. This is the TPR. We call it the TPR for short. And you can actually search by location, which is very nice. If you know of a specific provider that you want to see, like do they operate in Juneau, you are welcome to search that way as well. It'll give you a bunch of options, and then you can look at the different types of publicly available providers. If you have questions, there is an excellent FAQ. They did a very good job, I think, putting this together and made it very clear. This is a question that comes up every once in a while is, do I have to do ELDT before I get my CLP? The answer is no. They do not have to be done in that order. You can actually go and take your knowledge test and get your CLP and then go and do your entry-level driver training. That is the way that it is structured. And so, yeah, and this is right at the bottom of that main page. So if you go to the TPR, you do have to scroll down, but it's right there for you. If you have an issue with a training provider, you can actually submit a complaint right here. These are investigated by our CDL specialists and project managers. If there is a complaint that is received, it is reviewed, and they take steps to either investigate the provider, or if it's a very egregious, there are other options available per regulation. If you want to check on your driving record, so you've completed and you just want to make sure that it's been entered before you schedule that skills test with the DMV, you can go and check your driver record to make sure they uploaded it. They do have a time frame that they're required to upload, which I think is the like midnight on the second business day after you complete. So there is a time frame they have to enter it. So if you want to schedule something and you just want to make sure that it's been entered, you can check that yourself here. Something that has been happening a lot recently, we had an operation driver training last December where we actually went all over the country, including here in Alaska, and looked at providers to make sure that they were compliant. And if there was an issue that came out of that, they would have been issued what's called a notice of proposed removal. If that happens, you can actually check to see if a provider's there. If you do the search, it'll mark them as in review. In review notification means that they are going through the notice of removal. And if you want to know more about that, they actually are supposed to tell you that they are under a notice of proposed removal. It doesn't mean that they won't fix what they're supposed to fix and then everything's fine, but it may result in removal depending on the actions the provider makes. So just make sure that you're checking that when you're looking. If you are not covered by either the exception or exemption, you'll also want to see if ELDT does apply to you. So there is a verification check that you can do right inside the TPR. And it's kind of like doing your taxes on TurboTax. It kind of just asks you questions and you answer them. It's a self-guided, but it can be helpful if you're not sure, do I need to do this if I'm operating this type of vehicle? So I don't see any other questions yet. Oh, wait, we have a question and answer. Who offers the modified skills test in the restricted communities? So skills tests are performed here in the state of Alaska by either DMV or their third-party examiners. And they have to be authorized third-party examiners. So I would definitely recommend reaching out to DMV to ask them about that to see, do they have one in the area? I believe on the DMV website, they have a list of their authorized providers by location under the CDL section. I think it's near the bottom. You can click on it and it'll tell you who their third-party examiners and where they go. I did not pass per rule CDL previously, not on a road system. Can I retake the rule knowledge test after I study before the DMV testing? Okay, hold on. I did not pass per rule CDL previously. Do you mean that you did not pass the knowledge test previously? So I think there's a period of time that you have to wait between your knowledge tests, but you should be able to go back and retest. Or if you would like to, you can take your theory, which can be done online. If you like just feel like, hey, we would never say no, you can't go and take additional training. So if you're like, hey, I did not pass my knowledge test, what resources are available to me? You can actually, and I'm going to back up here, you can actually go to the TPR and search, and you can actually find TPR providers that don't cost very much. I think I saw one for like $25. You can go and do a theory training if you feel like you can't pass that knowledge test. Like if you want more training, you can actually leverage that resource to get the training. It's not required, but we're also not restricting it. If you feel like you need that training or you want that training, you can use this to take theory training. Just like I said, be careful when you're looking. Not all providers are created equal. I've seen some places charge $300 that, some places charge $25. So I definitely would say do your research. But yes, you can absolutely go and look and use that and then go back and go back to DMV after that point. So if that doesn't answer your question, please do go ahead and put another one in. Um, but
I'd add, I'll add an addition to that, Catherine. There's links to some free resources on training that take you through the knowledge part.
Mhm.
Um, there's links from the Alaska TTAP website to a free training for CDL that takes you through the knowledge piece of it for the written exam. So there are free options out there, as well as if you feel like the free just isn't cutting it, you're just not getting it, then investigate finding an instructor to actually take a class that walks you through the knowledge for the knowledge tests.
Yeah. And some of them are very, very good. Some of them are really well known. I can't recommend any because I'm a federal entity and we regulate them. But there are some really good ones out there. I can tell you that aren't very expensive to go through. Okay. So let's say now you have obtained your CDL. The next step is Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, right? You need to be registered as a driver in the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. If you have a CDL and you are operating a commercial vehicle. And what I say by that is if you're operating a commercial vehicle requiring a CDL. So if you get your CDL and all you drive all day is 10,000 pound vehicles and you're not operating that 26,000, vehicle, pound vehicle or greater, or you're not operating a 16 passenger, vehicle or more, or you're not carrying a placardable amount of hazmat. Because you could have a 13,000 pound vehicle with a placard amount of hazmat in the back, such as Division 1, which is like explosives. So we see that all the time. So if you're not meeting those thresholds, Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse is really for drivers who hold CDLs and are operating commercial vehicles that require the CDL. These two check marks are very key. It's not one or, it's this one and this one. And then these are other personnel who have access to it, of course, in order to do what they need to do within the clearinghouse. So in order to start working for a company and driving, all employers are supposed to check, and it's their responsibility, not yours as the driver. Your responsibility is if something happens and you're prohibited for any reason in the clearinghouse, you should not drive. But the actions that you can take is they should have you perform what's called a query in the system. And if you're an employer, because I don't know if we have any employers on here, just drivers, but if you're an employer, you would do an annual query. And drivers would consent to those either in writing, and you have to maintain that, or directly through the clearinghouse. What's really important is that if you are a driver, I highly recommend you log in because you can see everything on your clearinghouse, just to make sure that everything is the way that it's supposed to be. Every once in a great while, an MRO or somebody else makes a mistake and the names are too similar and the IDs are in the same state and something will get reported on the wrong person, or they tested two people at the same time and one was positive and one wasn't, and they'll flip-flop who they enter it on. It's really rare, but not impossible. So I always recommend just well, after you get your CDL, you would get a login.gov and go right into the system and see, make sure that your clearinghouse looks good. I also say that because every once in a while, before you get your CLP or CDL, old records from other positions may make it into the clearinghouse because an MRO made a mistake. That's happening less and less, but we are finding records from 21 and 22 that were positives that they had a different job they were tested for, and it just got entered into the clearinghouse by mistake, and we're having to clear those out. So I always recommend before you start driving, before you start going, there's no cost to the driver to obtain that clearinghouse access. Just go in, make sure you look good because your employer should be querying your clearinghouse. So if you need to enroll, you would go to login, you need to create a login.gov account. So when you go to at the top right, there's a register in the clearinghouse and it'll take you right to your login.gov. You only need to create this one time. So once it's created, you're good to go for a while. Um, So if you're an employer and you need to enroll, you don't get to do the easy way. The driver counts as the easy way. You actually have to go through portal right now to get clearinghouse access. It's a much longer process, and feel free to call us or contact anyone else for assistance. That is with the call center. It's right there when you're inside the system. If you're like, hey, I get stuck, it tells you that you need to contact the call center for assistance. We also get questions about if I'm an owner operator, how am I supposed to register? You actually are supposed to register as a company and then just indicate that you, yes, are an operator. And then it'll ask you if you're also a driver. And you'll get to register as both an operator and a driver in one fell swoop to save yourself time. So that is one thing that has come up is that sometimes owner operators will register only as drivers because it is a lot easier to register. And then we have to go back and try to fix that. And I can tell you it's not fun because I can't do it. IT has to do it. So I highly recommend that if you are an owner operator, you should go through this step-by-step process to do this. And so here is where you sign up. If you have questions or need that assistance, right at the top is where you would go and contact. They have a little contact form, and that'll send an email directly to the Drug and Alcohol Call Center team. I highly recommend the email route because you'll get an email with an incident number, and that'll allow you to follow up with them much better. I would not call the number. Many times you have to wait a long time. Sometimes it gets disconnected. I always recommend starting with go to the contact center, send in the form, get that incident number to your email, and go from there. Can violations be challenged? So if you do find that violation and you're like, oh no, why is this on my account? You have two courses that you can take. Really three, depending on what it is. One of them is you can, of course, go back to the person who reported it. So if, for example, that example I gave, an MRO reported it when you didn't have a CDL, you can go back to the MRO if they are still in business and still have the ability to get in, even if it was 4 years ago, you can try that route. That is the fastest and most effective route to get something taken care of. If that doesn't work, then your next step is to do what's called a petition. And you have two options on what kind of petitions that you can do. You have your petitions through the DACH system, and then you have the option to go through the Privacy Act. And you can research both of those. The DACH system, you would just say, I have a drug and alcohol petition. You'll put your test number in, you'll give the reason for it. If you have any issues with that or questions about it, like I said, they're very good. The DACH team is a separate call center team, and they also have a contact right there if you need assistance trying to enter. But it's pretty straightforward. And the best part is if you've already registered for a clearinghouse, you can use that same login.gov to get into DACH. So that's good there. So drivers wishing to request correction can also go through the Privacy Act. That has its own separate deal. I'm not going to go into the details of that. But you can definitely look up Drug Clearinghouse Record and Privacy Act. It's right in the FAQs, and it tells you all the things that you have to do to file that. It's a little bit more involved than just doing a regular petition. And when you do it, you just need to make sure that you're including the reason that you believe it was done in error. Eventually the driver will, you guys, the driver, or if you're an employer, the driver will get that decision. And that decision after, if it goes through a petition, you can do what's called an admin review. So you don't agree with the result, you do have one recourse action after that to provide additional information or produce additional documentation that may not have been considered through that first petition. But after that's done, that constitutes the agency's final action. And after that, it goes to the courts. Okay. All right. Let me shift back over here to chat questions. The question is a good question here. So I'm going to go right to the regulation here on who, you kids can't see me, but I have my book here. I always have my book. This is my regulation book. And so 382 is the regulations that govern clearinghouse. So when you look at the applicability to this, so the exceptions to 382 applies to operators of farm vehicles and firefighters who basically operate those vehicles. That is it. A state can waive parts of the requirement if they choose to. I am not aware of the state of Alaska doing so from this because of the exception they have. So to the best of my knowledge, Clearinghouse applies to every CDL driver in the state of Alaska, because it is really up to the state to apply for an exception on that front. So to answer the question, does the clearinghouse apply to all CDL drivers, or is there an exception? Based on our regulations, the state would have to apply that, and I'm not aware of them doing so. So yes, to the best of my knowledge, clearinghouse applies to all CDL drivers in the state of Alaska, regardless of what restricted license you might have. Any other questions?
Okay.
Anything that I can help?
Well, thank you, Catherine. And give them everybody a little more time to, oh, we got another one putting a question into the Q&A.
Yeah, no problem. I'll stick around as long as you guys have questions.
Do you see that question, or do you want me to read it?
Is a CDL required to haul a trailer with a gross vehicle weight of 10,000 pounds in Alaska? No, it is not. CDLs are only required for 26,000 pounds unless unless that 10,000 pound vehicle in Alaska is carrying placard amounts of hazmat. That's the only exception to that rule. Other than that, no.
All right. Is there an age limit as long as you're healthy? 65 and older is the question.
So the only age limit is in the state of Alaska, you can be 18 years old and get a commercial vehicle, but you cannot drive in interstate. What that means is you cannot pick up from a port, you cannot pick up from an airport, you cannot cross state line. The goods you're carrying cannot be like post like letters, for example. That's postage is considered interstate. Mail. Mail is considered interstate every single time. It's the same thing for passengers. If you're picking up passengers from a port where they've prearranged travel, you have to be 21 years old if you're doing any of those movements. If you're hauling gravel in Bethel from one side of Bethel to the other, and you never go to a port and you never take it anywhere, you can be 18 years old. There is no limit for obtaining a CDL. You just have to obtain what's called a med cert. And so that could be a factor. So that is a medical examiner's determination. You have to have a med cert in order to get a CDL. But as far as like obtaining one based on age, unless you're making interstate moves, you just have to be 18. Then it's 21 if you're making interstate moves.
So the follow-up to that is, can you hold a CDL if you're 91 years old?
There's nothing in FMCSA's regulations that restrict that.
As long as they pass the health check, which probably includes an eye exam, I would imagine.
Yeah, so you would have to go and get what's called a medical certificate. We call them med certs for short. You would have to be able to obtain one of those in order to be licensed in the state of Alaska. But that is, that's up to the medical examiner. I have no say in that. We, as FMCSA, do not have a restriction, an upper limit to age. We only have that lower limit. You have to be an adult, 18 years old, and you have to have so many years of driving, which I can't remember. I can't remember if it's 2 or 3 years I think it's 2 years of driving, to get an intrastate only license. And then once you turn 21, you can get that interstate license. The difference is it really has to do with the type of cargo that you're carrying and where the move is going. So for example, if you drive into Canada, that's an interstate move. So you have to be 21 to get that interstate move license. Otherwise, you'll have what's called a K restriction on the license, which means you can only operate intra-state, which is inside the state of Alaska. But again, that does not just, hey, I'm on Sitka and I pick up from the port. That's probably an interstate move, depending on where that originated from and where it goes from there. And I feel like I'm picking on Sitka, so I'll choose another place next time. But Ketchikan goes into Ketchikan port. You pick it up from the port. That's an interstate move, especially if it came, unless it came from inside the state to inside the state. If it came from Tacoma, on a barge up to, it's tracking the move. Then you got your interstate move.
Okay, so in a simplified situation, if you're operating the forklift that's helping move the stuff from the lighters that are coming into Piavik or Nome or anything at the port of the Nome, you have to be 21 or older.
Um, so if you're coming in,
So
yes,
barge traffic is
correct.
coming in.
Yes, because the type of move that you're making, yes, you have to be at least 21 to make those moves. Same thing with hauling mail. Mail is always considered interstate because it's so hard to track the individual pieces. So yeah, you just have to be 21. So if you're literally 21 years old and you're getting your license your first time, and you want that restriction 8, yeah, absolutely.
Um,
I think this is a question for you, Vicky.
this recording will be posted on YouTube. So yes, you can absolutely take the link and send the link to the recording once it's on YouTube as widely as you want. That's kind of the point. All of the TTAP webinars are recorded and posted to YouTube. That's to be a training library and a resource to everyone as they move forward. So yes, and what Catherine is providing is official information out of FMCSA. She did the whole approval process to make sure that she could do this presentation and it could be recorded. And so we're all good there. And if you want to share, feel free to share this the link to this recording as widely as you wish. And I'm going to share, can I turn off your sharing and
Yes,
share
I can
my
stop
screen
sharing.
real quick?
Absolutely. Oh, how do I stop? Oh, there, stop share. I just wanted to say one thing really quick. Somebody asked earlier about, am I required to do Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse with the exempt? Yes, and you have to do it even if you're intrastate. So that clearinghouse is not just interstate drivers. That's all CDL holders. And we have guidance on that. And if you do have follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to our office. We're happy to point you to this specific question with the specific information of are you required. So I'm actually going to really quick we have guidance, and I'm just going to read it to you guys really quick so you know that I'm right. Are Alaskans with a CDL who operate commercial motor vehicles that have been waived from certain CDL requirements to controlled substance and alcohol. So yes, Alaskan drivers with CDLs who operate commercial vehicles are subject to controlled substance and alcohol testing because they have licenses that are either marked commercial driver's license or CDL. wave drivers are only exempt from knowledge skills testing and the photograph of the license. So that's a guidance that we have, and that's specifically in regulations. So that it's not just me saying it, it's right here in 382 in the regulations. And
Mhm.
I'll pass it over to you, Vicky.
All right, and so while we're here, I'm going to show, this is the Alaska TTAP website, and this is our resources tab. And if you scroll down, we have a section called CDL resources. There's an old version of the webinar, and then this webinar will also be added to this as the newest information. And then we have the free CDL theory training that I mentioned earlier, which if you click on this link, takes you out to CDL theory training available through the Ohio, our partners with the Ohio LTAP. And that's something to explore that you can take. But what I want to show also is that we have a direct link when we say Alaska CDL information. You click on that Alaska CDL information, and that takes you to the rural driving information section of the Alaska DMV website. And here we've got the restriction 6, restriction 7, which is the CDL, Bush CDL. And then we have the 8, which is the waiver communities. And so if you scroll down further on there, you can get to, you have the commercial information, but there's also a non-commercial off-highway driver's license for Alaska communities that you can get as well if you're not driving commercial. But if you need a off-highway commercial driving license, this is the link to the list of communities. And here is the details on how you get that off-highway CDL. And so rather than searching through the DMV website, you can come to the Alaska TTAP website and go directly from there to this rural information page, which is unfortunately fairly buried on the DMV website, despite its importance to rural Alaska communities. And then one of the things is that you can get these restricted CDLs, but you will have to go through road testing to remove the restrictions to get non-restricted license. So that if you move to, for example, Anchorage or Fairbanks, and you've been operating under a CDL 7 or a CDL 8, and you want, with those restrictions, and you want to get a full-on CDL, you will need to go through the procedure of getting the road test, the full road test through a DMV officer or driving school to remove that restriction. But that's the additional details there. Okay. Um, oh dear. I'm sorry, Frankie, if I wasn't clear. The simple thing is go to the Alaska TTAP website. Because that has direct links to some of the Alaska DMV webpage. And that note, are there any other questions or concerns either for me or for Catherine regarding CDLs? Well, Catherine, thank you once again for presenting. I greatly appreciate you taking the time.
Yes, thank you everybody who joined, and hopefully this was informative and helped give you a better sense of resources and what you need to do. And I guess reach out to our division office. We're happy to provide any specific assistance if it does come up,
All
if you
right.
need it.
And on that note, I'm going to end the recording and